Sweet.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. It's just one of those days. My apologies to my listeners here, wondering what is wrong with her. I swear I have not been drinking. I am sitting here drinking sparkling water. That's all I'm drinking.
I'm still having coffee and it's 2:21 in the afternoon.
I saw that. I was actually a little bit jealous when I saw your cup. I thought, man, I should have made another cup of coffee. Dang it.
Yeah, I mean, I probably should stop drinking coffee at some point, but I mean, I enjoy drinking coffee all day. I usually stop around like maybe 3 o'clock. It'll be ridiculous to be like around 4 or 5 o'clock and I'm still guzzling the caffeine. Although I sleep pretty well, even though I do that, I must say. I don't know. How do you sleep?
Like a baby, to be honest.
Hmm.
But I
Same
also make
here.
sure that like I keep myself so busy the rest of the day
Hmm.
that by the time it comes to sleep, I'm just like out.
Yeah. Same here. Like I wear this little, I think it's called a Halo watch from Amazon. I mean, most people have like a Apple Watch or whatever, but when I saw the Halo watch, it was so simple. I was like, this is perfect.
Mm.
And it monitors my sleep habits and my steps and yada, yada, yada. So it's actually got me to become more active and I actually monitor how I sleep and I shoot for like a 80 to 90 sleep number or whatever. And usually that happens after, just like you said, where you're either busy all day or I've exercised at some point in that day for a good amount of time. And then I sleep like a baby. And I just absolutely, I don't know, it's changed, it's totally improved my sleeping patterns and I love it. I hope there's, if you can hear this drilling sound, listeners, I'm so sorry. They're like finishing up. Like, honestly, I was worried your guys are going to have to like listen to, well, you wouldn't because I would hit mute, but you know, they were drilling before, but now they're finishing up their work and going home for the day. So I'm so grateful because I hate to postpone things. I really do. But I'm excited for today's show. How about you?
I am too. The guest that we're bringing on for today's show is just an absolute amazing human. Um, I read his book, um, and it was just such an insight to who he is as a person, which is great because I only have ever known him really as a coming out coach. Um, so hopefully he'll talk a little bit with us today about it. If you're interested in reading his book, it's called Frankly, My Dear, I'm Gay. And I love the title. I think it is such a great title. Um, and
That is an awesome title.
he is so sassy in it. You don't need to be gay to read the book,
Uh-huh.
people. Like you just have to be open to hearing someone's experience, which he's going to really probably share with us today. But um, you know, it, it's funny because we were preparing for this episode. It was kind of bringing back memories of when I was younger, and my mother constantly would remind me, I'm gonna love you if you're a lesbian, if you're gay, if you want to come out. I'm like, no, mom, I'm good. I like dudes. It's cool, but I appreciate,
That is
the support.
hysterical.
And like there were moments where I actually questioned myself of, should I be? Am I? Like, would it be easier to date a woman? I just don't have the attraction. There's just no sexual attraction towards women. I can look at a woman and really appreciate everything that she has to offer. It's just there's no sexual interest there. But I appreciate my mother being very open and allowing me to be the person that I would need to be, which really makes me realize that not everyone has that. Most people probably don't, to be fair. And our guest today definitely didn't, considering he didn't come out of until I think he said his 30s. We'll ask him again. But I wonder, Kanan, if you are willing to share a little of your story.
Well, I actually came out when I was around 17 years old. And when it happened, my mother, she kind of was like alluding to the fact that she already knew about it, and she was just trying to butter me up with trips and gifts and stuff to get me to be comfortable enough to talk to them. I mean, in hindsight, looking back, it was probably obvious when I found when she came to when I went to Florida recently to see them, she had a box of photos that she found around the house, and I was looking through them and I was looking at my outfits and the way I carried myself and the stuff I did. I was just like, gosh, they probably already knew and we're just waiting for them to tell me. So, in a way, I feel like I was lucky because I got to come out at such a young age because there was a point where I was about to pivot and start to try to date women and push the gay down or whatever and suppress it a little bit more and maybe get into church a little bit more and yada yada yada, but I didn't do that. Now some would argue, see, he lost his way, the devil got him, whatever. But I feel like I wasn't in an opportunity at home. Even though my mother was a reverend and my dad was a cop, you would think I would have this pressure to fit a certain standard or traditions, but I didn't have that. I mean, yes, I do feel that my mother has her issues with my homosexuality that kind of manifest themselves in like microaggressions that, some people when they do these things they don't think that it's obvious, but it really is obvious, but you're just trying to overlook it and just love them for who they are. But they do what they do and you just love them. But my dad was very welcoming and very loving of me. He would set me aside and say things like, I would love it if you were straight, but this is who you are. And I would rather you be happy than anything else. So that was a profound moment for me and my dad. So all the way to the end, my dad was always super supportive and super happy with whatever decision that I had made. He didn't quite understand everything, which, I totally get. He
Mm,
was from a different generation,
of course.
but he was pretty open to at least listening and engaging and asking certain questions to get me to talk about certain things. And honestly, I kind of miss that about my dad because he did die less than a year ago. And the one thing that I had with my dad that don't necessarily have with my mom is that uh feeling of I can talk about whatever and they'll listen and they'll accept me. And I think for a lot of young gay kids, that makes a huge difference. I would say today, for a lot of younger gay kids, it's a great, I mean, it's not perfect by far, is it? It's nowhere near perfect yet. But now we have a world where you can choose your identity, you can share who you feel that you are, you can be yourself, and if people judge you for it or bully you for it, they're the one that's wrong, not the other way around, where it's like you need to hide yourself. Whereas, like, people like my dad's generation or generations before that had to hide themselves and sneak and go down corners and alleys to be able to have romantic connections. So I think that's the main difference between the generation after me and the one before me is slowly people are allowed to be themselves. And I think it's a great shift for at least the coming, I guess, next 100 years. What do you think?
I agree. And I appreciate you sharing your experience and even mentioning the difference of our parents' generation, if they were to come out versus our generation versus the younger generations. Because I feel like um, my friends that have kids that are coming out, they're doing it much younger because their parents are really trying to be open and accepting. People aren't going to be perfect. Our parents are human and we are a product of our environment and how we were raised and the thought process. Uh, and it's great that we're changing that. And we probably need to do better still. Um, but I do appreciate the fact that I feel we as a society are becoming more aware. Um, and so it's nice that kids today can come out younger. Like you said, you were 17. Um, Rick, I think was in his 30s when he came out, late 30s, maybe even. So, and he's from a different generation. He's much older than us. He's, our parents' generation. Hopefully he doesn't kill me for saying that because he's not listening quite yet.
I mean, hopefully he understands the context of why you said it.
We're outing your age, Rick. We're outing you. Totally different context there. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be, I think, a really nice opportunity for our listeners today to hear his perspective, because he doesn't just bring a professional perspective to the table today. He brings a personal one as well. He came out in his 30s, like I said, and became a speaker. He became a coach, wrote his book. He has his own podcast that you can follow if you are interested. But he's a coming out coach, for a lack of, just to put it into a nutshell. That is what he does. He helps men come out of the closet, and to do it in such a beautiful way, to feel supported and loved, and to, help them communicate what they need to their friends and family, if they're coming out of a marriage or whatever it is. And he's very busy doing this job too. There's definitely a need for someone with his skill sets. So let's bring him in and have him kind of talk a little bit more. So we're going to go ahead and introduce you to Rick Clemens. He is also a dear friend, and love his podcast, love his book. And so here he is with us today to talk to you and hopefully answer our probably ridiculously invasive questions.
They're not too invasive, I hope. Hi, Rick. How are you?
They can be.
This is not what I signed up for, so I'm going to exit now.
Oh, no. Well, I hope you get your Evian water on your way out.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay,
you're welcome.
I'm going to curse pretty soon the way y'all are treating me, but that's okay. So,
Thank
we
you
should have just done this across the parking lot again. We might as well have just walked across and said, okay, it's time for wine, but it is a little early in the day for that. So.
I mean, is it really? It's always, there's never the wrong time to have a glass of wine. I mean, come on.
I considered it. I don't. I have sparkling water because I'm lame and it's 2:30 in the afternoon, but it is what it is.
It is. And I could have now, because I mean, I was going to go swimming after I get done with this, but then I found out that they've decided not to allow people in the pool today. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess I could have had some wine after all. So there you go.
Wait, why did they do that? Is it because of
I don't
ongoing?
know. Don't even get me started. Don't even.
So Rick, we've been chit-chatting a little bit about you.
Oh no.
I know. Well, we knew you couldn't hear us, so. But I'm hoping that maybe you can give us a little insight to what got you into coaching to begin with.
Oh, deep question. Actually, in 1996 was the first time I was actually exposed to coaching. So of course now y'all are going to know how old I'm getting. But anyway, and I took on a new job, and in the craziness of the new job, they said, so we hired you because we're about to merge 3 companies together, and we really need some help getting rid of people and smoothing the transition. I'm like, okay, getting rid of people and smoothing the transition is not what I signed up for, but okay, I guess this is where we are. And I got tasked with hiring an executive coach to deal with all the egos in the C-suite to try to help them through this. And I'm like, I didn't even know what a coach is at that point, but I'm like, okay, I got it given the short list of people they were considering. And I hired this coach, and it was interesting to sit in the room and watch what she did, number one. And number two, then what she sent the people off to go work on. And I thought, wow, I kind of like this. Maybe I should do this. But of course I just got hired. So I'm like, no, I can't. I just got this job. I can't go pursue something else. And so I got to know her really well ended up hiring her a couple of years later as my personal coach. And I would say that was the first exposure to it. But then as life goes on, you keep growing in your business and all this sort of stuff. And in my career, and every time something would come up, I'm like, oh, no, can't go do the coaching thing because I really need a job. Oh no, can't do the coaching thing because now I got a job. And finally, when they finally booted me out of my last job and said, we really like you, we think you're great, but you're the one person on the team that we know can just go out there and you'll survive. I was like, screw this. I'm not doing this again. This was 2 in a row. And I decided to go independent. And that was the first time I really started exploring coaching. I still didn't jump immediately to it, but I'm like, I'm going to do this at some point. And that was kind
What
of
a great jump it was.
Yeah. Yeah. Almost as good as it would be to jump in the pool, but that's not going to happen today either.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, I love the name of your podcast that you have now, Life Uncloseted. And I love your mission of getting men to live their most authentic life. At what point for you in the past, what was your like tipping point where you realized, okay, I can no longer be in the closet? I know you just shared with us your tipping point for your career, but what drove you to really explore your most authentic self and share that with the world?
It was a drunk night in London when I met a really handsome Brit, and the rest is history. So
it's always some young hottie, isn't it? It just makes you think clearer or something.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't matter if you're gay or straight. It's
Exactly.
always young hottie.
Gay, straight, no matter what. Young hotties.
But that really was kind of the tipping point. I was in London on a business trip, and I had been struggling with this whole coming out thing for years. I did come out when I was 19 and then went back in the closet. And I'm glad I did, because I had an amazing outcome from that. 2 beautiful daughters of my own that I love dearly, even though they're pains in the asses now. But I love them.
Before you continue, what drove you back in the closet the first time?
Fear, parents, society, religion. All of that.
Who did you tell? Like, who did you come out to before you went back into the closet?
My parents. And they were like, no, we can't do this. And you're going to go talk to the pastor, and you're going to get through this. This isn't who you're supposed to be. And it was a critical moment, honestly, because it was right at the beginning of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, before any of us knew what was going on. And for me, it was pretty critical because my dad's oldest brother was gay. And it's always a little hard to talk about this. He was one of the very first ones in San Francisco to pass from the AIDS virus. And wow. I was young. I mean, I was 20 at that point in time. Pretty naive. Hadn't ever really had any, quote, sex with anybody. Had girlfriends, kind of did a little hanky panky, but I was like, no. And then once I really realized what was going on for me, I mean, I would sit outside of the one gay bar in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I would never go in. I was petrified to go in. And then when I finally came out to my parents, they're like, nope, not going to happen. And went to visit the pastor, and that was okay. But it really didn't work because he was so hot. I just sat there going, God, he's really good looking. And, it's just pleasant.
That's never a good distraction. It's like some of those movies where it's about like going to one of those conversion camps or something, but then all the people that are at camp with you are hot, and then the counselor is hot. I'm like, how is this going to be an environment that's supposed to convert someone if you're putting all this quote unquote temptation in front of me? So
exactly.
So did you start to actively find females to date at that point, or did your parents start to become matchmakers? What was that transition?
No, it was pretty mellow. There was like a little bit of a drive in my mind, like, okay, well, I'll meet somebody and I'll play the game. And the desire for, being who I was never really went away, but it definitely got diminished and put under the covers. And when I met my wife, I was already out of college, and it was just kind of like the stars aligned and it was supposed to happen. And suddenly when I told my parents I had been dating this gal, and I didn't tell them for a while, and suddenly they're like, oh, that's really good. And like suddenly the typical thing that happens for a lot of gay people is you get the blessings and like, okay, well, cool. Now everybody's happy that I'm doing this. And then you do something else. Oh, that's so good. And so suddenly you're getting these like accolades of, oh, you're the perfect son again. And I think that was subconsciously part of what was going on for me. Didn't take away anything that I still felt, but I did love her. I did fall in love with her. I wasn't one of these gay guys who was like, no, I can't do the sex thing. It's like, okay, well, we just make it happen. But there was never that deeper connection, and we made it 13 years. And then I finally was to the point where I'm like, I can't do this any longer. I can't be leading a dual life, which is what I was leading at that point. I was not proud of it, but wasn't being faithful and was having what we'd call today the hookups on the side, there without the grinder or the scruff or any of these things that are now available to make all that happen. And literally on that trip to London was when everything changed, because for the first time in my life, I met a guy and we went to his hotel room. But as I like to say, and then when I do my talks on stage, that was the night there was no sex. I fell in love and I fell apart because it was something completely different than I'd ever experienced before. And literally 48 hours later, I flew home, got in the car at LAX, drove to Orange County to my house and walked in the door. And in not so many words, but in very similar words to what the book title that I have out is, I said, frankly, my dear, I'm gay. And embarked on the journey. And I'm so glad I did, because that moment dictated so many other moments, even becoming a coach, where I said, frankly, my dear, I'm a coach, and frankly, my dear, I'm a business guy, and frankly, my dear, I'm going to help other people. It's just been a constant domino effect of just keep stepping into your truth, just keep stepping into your truth, just keep stepping into it. And sometimes you step into it and it's like dog poop and you're like, okay, well, that one didn't work quite so well, but you keep stepping. So
yeah, it at least feels good. Yeah.
And you're living your authentic life now. So I wonder if you could kind of enlighten our listeners a little bit about what that feels like to be living in this authentic self now.
Oh, it feels like the never-ending Cher farewell tour. You just keep going around and going around and going around, doing your thing and doing your thing. No, it feels, it kind of does feel like that. It feels relaxed. It feels free. It feels challenging at times, because the more authentic you are, the more somebody's going to come at you for being exactly who you are.
Yeah.
I feel more at peace than I think I ever have in my life, even though there's been challenges all the way through this whole journey. And that's just part of it. I mean, hello, if we didn't have challenges, we wouldn't be living. I think the biggest feeling I have, though, is honestly love for myself. Like, I'm good and nobody else has to tell me I'm good. Except my husband. He, every once in a while, I say, you've got to tell me I'm good. That's your role. But I think that's the biggest thing, is being at peace within oneself.
Now, before, when the thoughts that you had when you were, let's say, straight momentarily, were your thoughts always of someone else's judgment of you? And did they interpret this as gay, or did they interpret that as gay? Did you constantly feel back then that you were always worried about whether someone would be able to find out if you were gay, even though you were with a woman? Like, did you feel like you were in some kind of prison in some way, shape, or form?
I wouldn't say that I was worried if somebody would figure it out, but I did feel trapped.
Okay.
I felt like I was like, okay, I gotta make sure I keep the story straight, right? And it depended on where I was, how I showed up in the world. So, for instance, when I was in my not the last job I had, but the one where I met the Brit, I was very fortunate to work in an environment that there was a predominance of gay and lesbian coworkers. And as we in our loving LGBTQ community know, our gaydars are pretty sharp. And I think their gaydars were pretty sharp, like, oh, poor Rick. We know you, we can see it, but you can't. Even though I could, but I didn't want anybody to think about it. And the more I was in that environment, the more, of course, my circle of friends ended up always being the gay and lesbian people, mostly in the work environment. But I was very much accepted by everybody. But when we would go on trips, or we'd have it was a software company, so we had huge user conferences, like clients from all over the world come in. I was the VP of marketing. I put all that together. So I had to play a certain role per se. But even when we'd have like 1,000 people at our conference and I'm doing all my stuff and it's cocktail hours and stuff like that, it suddenly was really interesting to me to see that, yeah, I'm part of the big team, but everybody who'd crowd around me at the conferences was like, okay, gay, lesbian, gay, lesbian, gay. It's like, it wasn't my own magnet, but it kind of was. And that was actually part of what gave me the comfort of being able to step into being myself. Because in that environment, I could be myself. Yes, I would turn on a certain vibe and then turn it back off when I come back, quote, back to the office, so to speak. But if we were out on the road, I wasn't out hanging with the straight guys. I was hanging with, the gay and lesbian guys and gals. And I don't know, it was just such an interesting thing to see the intersection, and then you pull apart and the intersection come back together. And now that I look back on it, I'm like, I wasn't fooling anybody. Yeah, that's why all those people were there, and some of them were really close. I mean, some of them took me to a gay bar in Atlanta at one of the conferences, and they set me up with the bartender, and I'm like, what are you doing? They're kind of like, the head tilt. Come on, girl. Come on, girl. Let's get real here. So, but yeah, it was definitely an interesting introspection. And one of the things I take away from that is how that introspection now shows up in my life on a regular basis. Like I call myself out on it, but it's interesting to see when somebody else starts to call me out on something, like, oh, okay, I'm not fooling anybody, and it's helped me grow a lot as a human being.
Do you feel like you've become more successful as well ever since you've become more authentic in your approach to life and the way you present yourself to the world?
Absolutely. Because there's a realness to being who you are. And of course, now I have so much fun with it, because it's like, okay, I can be who I want to be, and I don't give a damn for the most part. I mean, there's certain places I quote give a damn, but it's more out of, hey, if I'm going to be in this environment, I know how far I can go. But then there's other environments I'm like, hey, what you see is what you get. And I don't feel like when I hold it back, it's not because I'm being inauthentic. It's more of, I'm going to be respectful in the environment that I'm in, and I don't hide it. I mean, there's many situations that I'll be at an typical, what I'll call mixed event. And I'm like, I don't feel compelled to say I'm gay, but I'm also not compelled to hide it. I'm very matter of fact about how I show up in those environments.
That's amazing. I wonder if you could share a little of your dating experience, because most of our listeners are probably at that point of dating, and dating men versus dating women is very different. You're raised from a young age as a male to understand how to date women. And here you are showing up as your authentic self, but with this learned behavior of how to date. How did that have to change for you?
First of all, I had to learn to date, which was a whole interesting journey in and of itself, because when I met my wife, if I go back even to like, I don't know, junior high, high school, college, maybe I dated, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 7 girls from junior high all the way up until I graduated college. So dating wasn't like a thing. In my last 2 years in college, I didn't date anybody. My first 2 years of college, I dated 2 girls. Both were very short-lived. I believe both of them were my freshman year of college, and then my sophomore year of college. I'm like, that's kind of when all this gay stuff happened. And then I was figuring some of that out. So I really wasn't trying to date anybody. I think the difference for me, but yet the similarity is guy or a gal, a majority of the dating challenges are exactly the same. Where the energy shifts is when it's man to man, because there's an energy that men have that won't allow vulnerability, or they like to butt heads, or they don't like to butt heads. They're not going to talk about stuff. And it's very challenging at times in those worlds. Now, mix the pot with, okay, it's man to man, and you're hearing sound bites all your life of, well, this is what gay men are, and this is how they show up in the world. It was totally different in some ways, but yeah, it's actually very similar to the sound bites heterosexual guys hear. Well, this is what a man's supposed to be, and da-da-da. So you're getting that as a gay man, but then on the flip side, as a quote heterosexual man, I'm like, well, this is what a heterosexual guy is supposed to be. So I have these two conflicts going on, because my heterosexual self is saying this is how I'm supposed to be, but inside I'm like, I don't know how to show up that way. You know, there was a group of us young married couples who we all kind of moved into the same townhomes around the same time, and all started having kids. And of course, you know, two of the guys that are part of our circle, I was like, oh, girl, I don't know if I can hang out with you guys, but it was also that I have to show up and be this with those guys. And then now suddenly when I came out of the closet, okay, well, now I have to show up and be this as a gay man. And you add that into the mixture of dating, and there's just lots of conflict showing up. Mm-hmm. And I know, because I've worked with so many people in the dating arena, gay and straight, where there's the parallels. We have these personas we think we have to show up as a woman, you have to be this. As a man, you have to be this. And as a lesbian, you have to be this. As a gay man, you have to be this. And the joke is on all of us, because there's actually no handbook for any of this.
No, there isn't. Now, if I want to ask you like a kind of personal question, if I may, there is when I feel—
Wait, we haven't been doing that already?
No, well, this one is really kind of personal, because I know that there's a transition when you come out as a gay male. Okay, for straight males, you're in high school or middle school for some, I guess, lucky whatever. You start to experiment. But for gay men, we kind of have to figure that out. And there was maybe a generation where, we had porn, or we found like adult stores and stuck into those and then learned about it. But for the most part, our introduction to like the gay world sometimes is sex, and hooking up with people and hooking up with guys in cruising spots, or nowadays it's Grindr or one of these sex websites. So I do see that there's a difference when it comes to courting and sex, when it comes to the straight world, where it's plentiful, it's everywhere, it's, hey, take your chance, see what you get. But in the gay world, I feel like not until now, where everything is a little bit more open and you can approach someone, but for the most part, it still seems like there's an emphasis on embracing your sex life and making that a part of your personality. Do you feel like that may scare some men into coming out of the closet, because maybe they fear that they're going to miss out on something and it makes them stay in the closet? Like, what do you think? What are the feelings around that?
I think for the most part, that's actually one of the biggest things, is if I come out, have I already missed out? If I stay in, I'm going to miss out. So you're missing out either way. I mean, when I work with my guys who, mostly men, I mean, I've worked with a few women coming out of the closet too, but I will say men or women, a predominant common theme is, well, at this age, I've already missed out. I did a call earlier this week where I have two calls I do, one for guys over 40 once a month, and then one for guys coming out of the closet. And I had one gentleman on the call, and he's like, well, at 59 years old, I'm pretty sure I'm past, anybody wanting to have anything to do with me. And I just kind of let it sit there, because a lot of the guys that come on the call, they've been there quite a while. And I said, well, let's call him Jim. I said, Jim, here's what's so interesting. The only person that's going to buy into that bullshit story is you. Because we're never too old. We're never too old to find love. We're never too old to have a relationship. We're never too old to come out of the closet. We're never too old to be dating. It may be more painful later in life, but you know, hey, there's somebody out there that's probably in the same boat that you are. And the more that we allow the story to get created about what we're capable of doing and not capable of doing, that's what's going to hold us back. Every guy I've worked with, and a gal too, but since I do predominant guys, I've wasted so much time.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, what if that time was actually you've been preparing for this moment instead?
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it.
Because there's nothing that anybody teaches us, gay or straight, but especially gay men or lesbians or, you know, whatever. I don't think anybody's going to teach us how to date somebody of the same sex. Not really any more than somebody taught any of us how to date somebody of the opposite sex. Thank God for you dating coaches, because it's like, hey, let's guide them to the water, so to speak. But it's very difficult for most people to navigate through this without feeling some either sense of, well, if I do this, I'm going to lose. And if I don't do this, I'm going to lose. It's the double-edged sword of life in general, but especially in the dating and relationship. If I give myself freedom to go do this, what might I lose out on? But if I go do this, what might I also lose out on? And this is predominant in the gay culture. I mean, so many gay men are like, okay, well, yeah, I've got a boyfriend, but what?
He's
The
cute
grass is
over
greener.
there. Yeah,
exactly.
The grass is always greener. And that's what I like what you said earlier about, you know, you have these traditions when you were straight, and then you traditions when you're gay that are kind of expected of you. And in our pre-planning meeting, I actually mentioned to Andrea that I went to a pool party recently. And it's just funny to me sometimes how, you know, for some gay men, you say hello, and the next thing you know, you're doing something sexual, like maybe 30 seconds later. And I just said, this is so interesting how this is just so naturally a part of our culture that you don't even bat an eye if it happens. If anything, you get excited. Now, I know there are swingers for straight people, things like that exist, but it's also considered something that's in the fringes of straight society. Whereas in the gay society, it is like a mainstay in a way. So I always find it very interesting for men as they get older, when they come from tradition, like, to me, it feels like it would be scary in a way. Like I'm a heterosexual male. I've had a wife for 25 years. I have 2 kids or 3 kids. We have a dog, an Acura, a house in the suburbs.
Yep.
But I can't get this thing off my back where I'm really attracted to men. Now I'm going to take the plunge and go into this. But from what I see in the news and what I see on all the blogs and on Tumblr, you know, all the gays are out on cruise ships and in the woods fucking. Am I going to have to do that?
Right.
So
it's a scary space. But here's what's interesting is I've talked to young gay men who never went through the whole I went down the heterosexual path and everything, and they're just as scared. They're just as scared because there's something about just being in the world as a LGBTQ person right out the gate that puts us on the defensive. So we can never drop ourselves into vulnerability. We can never be completely present. And I know I'm talking to everybody listening right now because vulnerability is a scary space. Oh my gosh, what if I do this, you know? But I have the quote for this, and this just came out of my mouth last night. And it was so funny because we're on this call and I said this and I'm like, okay, that's an Oprah moment. I hope somebody wrote down what I just said because I really don't remember what I just said. So this morning, one of the guys that was on the call sent me an email and he goes, hey, Rick, I captured what you said. And I'm like, oh, bless you, my son. But I think it's appropriate for this conversation. And also I had to get my Oprah moment here. So just allow me this. The more we allow our vulnerability to be present, the more present we can be with our vulnerability. And I don't know that any of us in the dating world get that. without
I
being
felt that. I
vulnerable and
got goose
present.
pimples from hearing that,
Oh, good.
honestly.
Now, can you just tell Oprah to like take this and run with it?
Yeah,
So
you'd be perfect, actually. You should get your own show on her network. That would actually
exactly.
be perfect. Like you could be like a Iyanla Van Zant, but for gay men, the gay
Yeah,
man
exactly.
whisperer. You
Yeah,
go around
exactly.
helping gay men like fix their life.
But here's
Oprah,
the
if you hear
thing.
it, I'm the producer.
Think about this, Kanan, because if you think about everything we've been talking about, and Andrea and I have had these conversations before, but I'm really not saying anything different than what goes on with heterosexual relationships.
It's all the
It,
same.
it is. We're all screwed up. So
Mhm.
let's just drink to that. I mean, hey.
Yeah. I think that's the thing that we all forget, which I feel like we fight, whether it's gay against straight, black against white, man against woman, short against tall, fat against skinny. At the end of the day, everybody kind of wants the same thing. And it's unrequited, no, it's unconditional love. It's a support system, family, community, a little bit of success, maybe, you're ambitious, but for the most part, it's love and support and family. And that crosses all borders. And I feel like for gay men, especially, and gay women, because everything has been so muddy and we've kind of had to walk through whereas like if you're straight, you have the Bible and the traditions of that. If you're any other religions, you have a certain set of traditions you can follow that is supposed to be the normal path that they like to perpetuate or whatever. But for gay people, we've had porns and movies and books and magazines, and we've kind of had to figure it out on our own. So I do think that courting for gay people is much different than it is for straight people. Now, you mentioned earlier at the beginning of the conversation, when you were married to your wife, you just didn't feel it. Like no matter what you did, you were there, but you just didn't feel it. What was it, if you can put it into words, what did you feel with the guy in London that you did not feel with her, that kind of told you this is the love path that I should be on versus the one that I was on with my wife?
Great question. There was lots I felt with my wife, but I think the deeper connection, like I can feel this synergy. I mean, we were connected. I mean, we had, we were parents. We had a lot of stuff. We loved, we loved to travel. We loved to dine out. We loved similar shows and stuff. But there was just, I don't know, there was just something that just wasn't there. There was that empty black hole, so to speak. And in the midst of it, I couldn't put my finger on it, to be honest. I really couldn't put my finger on, okay, so what is it I'm not feeling here? What is it I'm not experiencing, other than there was just that deeper piece. And now that I'm past that relationship, there was probably more than just me being gay, because I've now been with my husband almost 20 years. And I can see where the connection points are, even when we're not connected, even when we're in the midst of like, okay, you're being an asshole and I don't want to talk to you. There's still a connection, like, okay, but there's something that's at the core of the essence of us being a couple. So that's probably as close as I can describe it.
It's interesting because, I really want people to, what I really want them to hear from that last question is that it doesn't matter about race. It doesn't matter about sexual orientation. Relationships are tough, and relationships can sometimes have a hole. And what causes the hole is not what should be focused on. What should be focused on is, can we fix this hole, or should we separate and move our separate ways and be fulfilled by ourselves first before getting into a relationship? Something that I'm always trying to get clients to really understand is you need to enter into a relationship as a whole authentic self first. And when you do that, you will have the greatest relationship. And I feel like you kind of see that with your husband now. You are entering into that marriage, into that relationship as a whole authentic version of yourself. And now it's this beautiful partnership that
And
it obviously has its problems, but
yeah. But I also believe when you start to understand your whole authentic self, you can catch too when, oh wait, I need to do some more work on this. It's never done. It is never, ever, ever done. And I've been talking to my husband a lot about this lately, just because I'm in a really great space with my work and the stuff that I do. And I've got great clients, and I have a full-time gig that I do for another coaching company, and just things are good, but there's a hole in there. And so being able to recognize the hole is like, okay, it's here. And I know when I feel that hole, because now I can really define it when that's happening, it means it's time for me to go do some work. Like do some work on me, like, okay, dig in there, figure it out. So I'm doing a couple of interesting little online courses starting this week, just because, hey, I need to get dirty with myself. I need to get into the muck right now. I need to get into the thrash, as a friend of mine would say. But to the dating thing, I just happened to have been on, to my true confession, you weren't the first podcast I was on today. So
shame on you.
So offended.
Yes, but I literally was on one like 2 hours ago, and this guy by the name of Lauren Michaels Harris popped. I didn't even know he was going to be on this. And then suddenly he's on the podcast with me, and I'm like, oh, I'm really digging this guy. And he's a fellow coach, and he's an out gay Black man. So we started getting into all this conversation about that sort of stuff with this podcast we were on. And he told a story about, I believe it was his mother, like, what kind of woman are you into? And he's like, this is before he's out. And he's just kind of like, what you talking about, mama? What are you asking me about? And what was interesting as he relates this whole story, he goes, at that moment, I realized how much my mom was very tuned in to who I was. So then I think the way the story went, a few days later, she finally said to him, so is it a man or is it a woman? And of course, he's still not out. I mean, he's not fairly recently out, but he came out later in life too. Mm-hmm. So he just kind of like brushed off that comment. Well, then like another day later, of course, mamas, they don't let this stuff go. They're going to get to the bottom of it. Right. She said, well, here's some advice I have for you. Whether you're into a man or a woman, doesn't really matter. But I want you to think about, if you're with a man and you're really into being with that man, would you cheat on him with a woman? And if you're into a woman and you're really into that woman, would you cheat on her with a man? Because whoever you're willing to possibly cheat with is probably the person you should be with.
That's the truth.
That's interesting to hear it put that way.
Yeah.
Right. Because that
it's
opens
funny
a
you
whole
say that.
doorway. Oh no, is Kanan going to give us like a true confession moment here? Like, I'm not.
Well,
really...
no, yeah, kind of, sort of. So it's like, I said that before I met my husband. I said, so I was single and I was having fun and I didn't want to be with anyone. I was making good money. I was like working in the Hamptons, working in New York, working in New Jersey. I was having a good life. And then I said, I don't want to be with anyone until I meet someone that makes me not want to cheat on them. And I feel like it sounds crazy, but it says something. It's like, okay, you actually make me not want to like look for someone else. I feel like I don't want to see what life is without you. So therefore, I feel like, I don't know if maybe you agree, Rick. I mean, sexuality is a little bit different in the gay world. It's kind of probably the same in the straight world if you like pull back the layers a little, but It's a little bit more fluid in the gay world, where it's like you can have your relationships where they are, your priorities, but then there's always the outside, the outskirt people and whatnot. But that being said, my husband is someone that I feel like I cannot see myself not being with. And I feel like if you feel that with someone, that is pretty profound. And I would imagine that when you were straight, you probably didn't feel that way with your wife all the time. Mm-mm. And that has to be such an empty feeling, because I know there's a lot of men who are like deep in religion, deep in tradition, deep in whatever. and they have these full-on families. Because I think one of our older shows, I had mentioned to Andrea, I had an incident with this Muslim man, and he approached me. We did something, yada yada yada. The next day, I found out he had a wife and like 5 young male sons, and I'm just like, damn, I know I'm not the only person he's done this with. So now he's putting his wife at risk, because I know he's probably having sex without protection behind her back, and then now she's at the risk of getting STDs, which I think was the rise of a lot of Black women getting HIV and AIDS in the 90s, because of these men cheated behind their back, and because they don't consider themselves gay, they can't possibly get a gay disease. It's just misinformation. And I like your message, is basically what I'm getting at. I think that men, no matter what age, should be their authentic self and be happy in whatever that is, because it will decrease a lot of the bullshit that we deal with on a daily basis as human beings. And what are you going to say? Go ahead.
Well, I think it's not only just men. I think anybody who's in relationships needs to really dial in.
Yeah.
To what the bullshit is they're willing to do. I have a client, let me see if I can do this, who has not lived with his spouse for 2 years and has not had sexual relationships with that spouse for 10 years.
Whoa.
But still feels obligated to try to work through this, even though the spouse will not even treat him as a human being. You have to question. And then finally, when I was coaching him recently, I said, so let me just put this in a framework, because he's come out to her and he wants a divorce. And suddenly she's like, well, I think we need counseling because I don't understand why you want a divorce. I'm like, girl, I'm sorry. God. There's more than just like, take the sex piece out of it. But if you're not even living together, and there's some other stuff that he shared that I don't feel comfortable saying, but I just like, if you're not being treated as like a person in your own home as a person, there's a problem. Yeah. So I finally said to him, I said, so let's look at this from a completely different angle. And I think this is something that each of us and those who are listening, it's a kind of a good question to like ask yourself. How much are you willing to personally sacrifice your own belief in yourself to be somebody else's person?
Oh, it's a huge sacrifice.
But doesn't a lot of that really boil down to, I just want to be loved?
Yes.
I mean, I hear so often, I see it splattered all over social media all the time. I just want someone to love me.
Yeah.
But it's not you they love if you're changing constantly to meet their needs.
Hiding.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, when I hear these stories like that particular client, and I mean, he's on the East Coast, she's living here on the West Coast. They've been at that for 2 years. They maybe talk once a week. I said, so what are the conversations like? Oh, we just check in. Most of the times when they check in, the questions he gets is, well, did the gardeners do this? I'm like, you're living clear across the country. What do you care?
Right. Who gives a fuck if the gardener was there or not?
Right.
It's obviously
but to
like
your point,
security
Andrea,
or comfort.
It is security and comfort, and that need to be loved.
Yeah.
And when you cross over that boundary where, well, it's better than not having anybody or not feeling any bit of love, question how much of yourself are you willing to sacrifice for that little bit of love?
Yeah,
exactly.
I feel like that will eat away at you at some point. Like it may not be happening fast, but it's like the sand time thing. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, okay. If you tilt it over, it's like it's slowly going. Like time is going to run out. Exactly. Time is going to run out on whatever that situation is that you're trying to hide. My mother said growing up, everything in the dark eventually comes to the light. Maybe at the very end, but eventually, or maybe even after you're gone, eventually it's going to come out. So if it's going to come out, why not just be the person ahead of it and just go through it, live it? Because I do feel that the fear of things is much worse than actually going through it. Now, granted, having your family disown you, kick you out without your belongings, living with a mate that doesn't really, the family doesn't know about you, and then they pass away and then your life is cut in half. I mean, these are some extreme situations where life does abruptly change and you are left with a basket full of shit, to be, if I, not to be frank. But I still feel at the end of the day, regardless of what life throws at us, we have to be ourselves, because we're only here for so long. Yet it's a blink of an eye when it comes to how long the universe has been around. So why spend this time in the closet? And that's why I love your show title, Life Uncloseted. Get these men out the damn closet. It's like, come on.
Well, and it's not just men. What's interesting, back to what you just said about fear, one of my favorite phrases that I use a lot when I speak on stage is, fear is only as great as we give it life.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
life
that's so
is
true.
only as great as we allow, how do I say it? Life is only as great as we keep the fears from living.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because if we don't give fear life, there is, I mean, fear is such an interesting thing, because you can be afraid of jumping out of the airplane, even though the parachute's on there. But the moment you jump and that chute's open, the fear's gone.
Yep.
Right.
I mean, every fear that we face is only as alive until the moment that you walk through the fear.
Yeah.
And the minute that first step is like, okay, well, that's done. Now, I'm not diminishing this. I mean, it's scary. There's no doubt it's scary. There's no doubt it's scary to say to a spouse, I'm gay. It's no doubt it's scary to say, I'm going to walk away from this job and go build my own business.
Mhm.
You know, there fears are fears, and we get it, but they're only as alive as you give them life.
Yeah. Do you ever feel
Absolutely.
like you came out too late? Like, I know you said you've gone through these feelings, you've worked through it, but does that thought ever cross your mind? Like, oh man, because I had a friend, he was 30 years older than me, and we were kind of dating. I don't know. But always felt like he was making up for lost time, because he kind of regretted those 30 years that he was married, and he had his successes, had a kid, yada yada yada. But it always felt like he was trying to make up for lost time. Do you still have those feelings even 20 years later?
No.
Oh, that's good.
Because well, part of it, you know, and I've been very open about this anytime I've been on a podcast. Part of it was I was having my cake and eating it too, all along the way.
Okay.
So by the time I was, quote, out for what a lot of guys experience, I'd already had plenty of sexual experiences. What I hadn't had was that connection with a man. I mean, yes, a connection in the sexual, but that heart to heart, oh wow, align this, that hadn't existed. So yes, there was a little bit of kid in the candy store once I came out, because now I could have, you know, I could go out and hook up with a guy, and I could have him over to my apartment, and it wasn't like, who's gonna, you know, am I gonna get caught, or do I have to make this happen quick, or is somebody gonna see me, you know, wherever, you know, that sort of stuff didn't exist at that point.
But it just all went away. You could just be yourself.
Yeah.
And you can.
What I would say I regretted more was, and this has nothing to do with like when I came out, but yet it's very tied to it, is as a parent, that because of the circumstances, my youngest daughter has no recollection of what life with mom and dad was like, because she was only 18 months old or 9 months old when I came out. But on the flip side of that, she has no recollection other than living in a very supportive, beautiful, mixed blended family home. So it worked to her advantage in so many ways too.
Yeah.
She's very open-minded. She's very strong as a woman. She's kind of I'm not going to take bullshit off anybody sort of thing.
Yeah, that's good.
So
especially
there's
this world.
Yeah, exactly. So there's some good things that came out of it, but no, I've never said, I mean, honestly, I feel this in my heart, and because of the experience, that when I did come out, and then I flew to San Francisco to see my uncle right about a week, maybe a week and a half before he passed away. And this was, again, this was the beginning. So when I walked into that hospital room, I mean, he was covered in splotches, and they're like, we don't know what this is. And, you know, and I remember the conversation that he and I had, and we had never had any conversations about me being gay. and he was very weak. And, so I still believe this whole experience was just by, divine intervention. We're having short little conversations, whatever he could say. And I said, well, I'm going to let you rest. And he said to me, just remember, you have a choice.
Wow.
Oh my
I felt
God.
that.
And it's always been a biggie for me.
Mhm.
And then, he passed and everything. I do believe I made the choice that needed to be made because I was naive. I was sexually inexperienced.
Mhm.
All that at that time, I honestly believe if I had come on out of the closet right then and there, I wouldn't be talking to you guys today
Mhm.
because I was too naive. I would have probably ended up, contracting HIV/AIDS, and no fault to anybody's, but I would have been rebellious. I was never really a rebellious kid. So that would have been
Yeah.
like a complete switch in my demeanor and stuff.
Yeah.
So I feel blessed in so many ways, but that's the only thing that I can say. I kind of regret that maybe I could have experienced something, but I'm experienced everything I'm supposed to have experienced at this point,
Well, that's good.
and
to
yet
look at it
to
like that.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, our life experiences make us the people we are today, good and bad. And we have to have those experiences in order to grow and to learn and to become higher humans, to
Mhm.
have a higher awareness of life. So I appreciate you sharing so much of your story with us and so much of your private life. But again, I just want to throw this out there that if you have not read his book yet, frankly, my dear, I'm gay, you have to read it. Your sassiness in the book is worth the read alone. It's just, it inspires you to want to be your more authentic self, not just because of the coming out, but because of the way you speak to your readers and the way you speak to your listeners on your podcast as well. So again, thank you so much for being with us.
Yes. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
I
Yeah.
feel like we could continue to talk, and we will continue to talk for our
A wine
Patreon
hour,
viewers.
everything. Yes, exactly.
So if you want to see our post show where we're going to get raw and not naked, I don't know why that popped into my head. Come watch us on patreon.com and become a subscriber. Otherwise, we will catch you on the flip side on our next episode. So until next time.